why they're so excited about widening this war in Gaza. What's the problem right now? Why they're not seeking a political settlement? Is that a sign of weakness? Is that a sign of winning? A sign of losing?
Well, Nima, it's complicated, as you know. It has to do with infighting within the Israeli government, which is a very strange bunch of characters. And it has also to do with infighting within the American government, where also, if I may say so, there are a very strange cast of characters. Now, here's a straw in the wind. About a week ago, it was announced that the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier with its accompanying ships was being withdrawn, taken back to Norfolk, Virginia. I said to myself, huh? That doesn't really square with this uptick in tensions. So I filed that around. The next day, the Israelis announced that they're pulling out full brigades out of Gaza. I said, whoa, there's two straws in the wind. One has to be cautious, especially if one is still an intelligence analyst, not to jump to conclusions. But that told me then, and it tells me now, that not everybody is agreed in the United States government as well as in the Israeli government as to how to proceed here. Now, the Israelis, many of them, want to widen the war, witness the fact that they have been assassinating people. They have, in my view, been killing 100 and wounding 200 people in Iran, who were actually participating in a memorial service for Soleimani, killed exactly 4 years before, and Trump bragging about it. Now, that major provocation, and they're blaming it on ISIS, but it's really hard to believe. ISIS is trotted out when somebody needs to be blamed for something. It was the Israelis, in my view. And what were they trying to do? Well, they're trying to provoke Iran into some kind of action where they can go to Washington and say, hey, those terrible Iranians, Iran, they're retaliating, so-called, but they're killing Israelis and maybe Americans. Now, what am I after here? I'm saying that the Iranians are pretty clever people, okay? They know about the correlation of forces. They know what the remaining aircraft carrier, USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, what that is capable of doing. And so my guess, and it's just a guess, is that the Iranians will let rise to this bait, okay? So this Israeli provocation will not achieve what the Israelis really want to do, and that is to get the U.S. engaged militarily, so that they can prevail in Gaza, which I would add, they are not doing. They are not prevailing right now. So if I'm an Israeli, one of those now in the government, and this didn't work, in other words, we couldn't provoke Iran into doing something really stupid, maybe we ought to do it for them. Yeah. How about a false flag attack? They still have one aircraft carrier out there in the Persian Gulf area. Yeah. Let's make believe Iran does it. Let's kill a bunch of Americans. And then the people like Senator Lindsey Graham, who says, once they start killing Americans, then we're going to obliterate Iran. So now, do I think this is likely? I'd give it a 50% chance because the Israelis are losing. Now, another factoid here is that this week, the Defense Intelligence Agency leaked a report saying, hey, Israel, if you get involved in another war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, there's no guarantee you're going to win. You probably will lose like you did last time. Whoa, that was surfaced to the press, right? What else? Well, there's the biggie here, and that is, what's today? Tuesday? In 2 days, there will be a meeting of the International Court of Justice, which has a complaint filed by South Africa saying that Israel is committing genocide. Now, I have not read the entire 84-page text of that complaint, but I am reliably informed by the likes of John Mearsheimer and others that is an airtight case, that the detail, the ingenuity that went into putting this thing together is bound to prevail, and it's altogether likely that after the International Court of Justice looks at this, and it's doing it in an expedited manner, of course, you know why, that the Israelis will be found guilty of genocide. Now, it's hard to connect these things all together, but that case was filed on the 29th of December. It's really coming to a head now, together with the fact that even the American intelligence agency, DIA, thinks that Israel will not win against Hezbollah, much less in a two-front war, for God's sake, in Gaza and Hezbollah. And the fact that the Israeli IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are not much good for much more than shooting rockets. They're good at that. Dropping bombs, they're good at that. Not so good at infantry tactics. Why? Well, because they're mostly 2-year trained people who do their active duty, and then they go back to civilian life. And during their active duty, what do? Well, they suppress the Palestinians in the West Bank. They beat them up. They shoot some of them. It's really not good practice for taking on a formidable foe such as Hezbollah. Now, my friend and colleague, Scott Ritter, made that clear from the very outset that, hey, watch now, the Israeli IDF is not much good for winning this war. So where does that leave them? Well, it leaves them in a very precarious position, obviously, because they can't get their act together at the top of the Israeli government. There's backbiting, there's tantrums being done. There are people refusing to come to meetings and so forth. And Netanyahu, I'll say just one more time, has a personal stake in all this. If he stops being prime minister, he will lose his immunity. There's a very good court case against him and his wife for bribery and all other kinds of misdeeds. He could end up in jail. Now, is it the prevailing influence here? I would say no, but it's a big factor when you're involved personally. When you have this kind of stake in avoiding defeat, then you just escalate. And if you can depend on the United States, well, of course, as Netanyahu, as he bragged 23 years ago now, quote, I know America. It can very easily be moved in the right direction. 80% of the Americans support us. That's absurd. Close quote, period. Well, it was absurd then. It's still more absurd now because it ain't 80% anymore. It's down to about, well, if you talk about the elite, it's been down to about 50%. If you talk about the common citizens who are in possession of real news, down around 25%, in my view. That's very important. So as long as Netanyahu and his cronies can depend on unlimited American support, well, then they'll go on and do whatever they want to do. The question is, will they really wipe out 2 million Gazans? Now, they've tried to arrange it, and in the initial stages of this, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, cooperated with them. It was the plan. It was all written down in one Israeli think tank and leaked to the press. Here's the plan. We drive the Palestinians into the Sinai. Okay, what's left of them. Now we got all kinds of money, says Tony Blinken. We'll pay for the tents. We'll pay for the relocation. We'll get them out of the Gaza, put them in the Sinai, and we'll, figure what other country, maybe the Congo, and we send these people, as though these people were just ploys, as though these people were not even human, as those people were, as the defense minister called them several weeks ago, just human animals, okay? Well, you probably remember, Nima, what short shrift was given that plan by, by the president of Egypt, who happens to have rule over the Sinai. When Blinken proposed that to him, he went bananas. I mean, you could see it in the video. It was a very acrimonious meeting. Now the U.S. is saying, "Oh, that was a terrible plan." If they weren't part of it in the beginning. No, we don't want to displace a whole. We don't want ethnic cleansing because that's very close to genocide. Okay, so what's going to happen? The choices are unambiguously awful. How many more Gazans that have to be killed in southern Gaza now before this thing stops? Well, maybe we'll get some word from the International Court of Justice, because lots of people are involved, not least of whom are Americans, who can be shown to have enabled, who have armed, who have given the political support to Israel necessary for this genocide. So it's a bleak picture, but there is some sort of light at the end of this tunnel. And my worry, of course, is that justice moves very slowly, even if the ICJ, International Court of Justice, moves very quickly, which so far they have. How many thousands of more Gazan Palestinian children, women, men are going to be killed in this ethnic cleansing? So, that's where I see it now. It's more in play than before. Who are these people that decided to pull the USS Gerald Ford out? Well, I think those are people with a little bit more sense, saying, look, maybe, just maybe, the Israelis will get a message here that our support is not 150% as they expect it to be, just maybe. And there were reflections in the Israeli press that give them pause for worry. It's really, really complicated. I hope I have thrown a little clarity rather than further dust on the situation here.
Israel's finance minister said that there are 2 million Nazis in Gaza. When it comes to this type of rhetoric, that it's so bold, do you think, are they trying to convince the public opinion in the United States? Are they trying to convince Europeans? For what reason they're using such bold statements?
I would say that their primary audience are Israeli citizens themselves. They have been propagandized. Most of them, very sad to say, are in favor of driving out the Palestinians or making them dead. They're subhuman people. They're kind of, how under the Third Reich, the Nazis viewed the Untermenschen, okay? The subhuman people, Slavs, Jews, and those kinds of people. Now, revenge, of course, is at work here for what Hamas did on the 7th of October, but there's a lack of proportionality, complete lack of proportionality that everyone can see except the people in Israel. Now, you asked about U.S. media. as you know, Nima, U.S. media is disproportionately ruled and operated by Zionists. Do not blanch before the word. Just look at them. And our government is primarily ruled by self-proclaimed Zionists. Joe Biden, first and foremost, saying, I'm proud to be the greatest Zionist in America. Okay, well, I don't think he knows what that means. It's not Jewish, it's Zionist. It has to do with supremacy, superiority. It has to do with considering other people less than the Jews who were promised this land, so to speak, and want to get rid of the vermin, which is also a word that has come into vogue today after since World War II. So Zionists are Zionists. It's not the Jewish religion, which is it's completely different animal. It's a political philosophy, started in the late 1800s, and just kind of given the British reason to get out of this colony that they had there in the Middle East and give it to the Zionists. And who cares who's already there? I mean, 750,000 Palestinians. Well, the Israelis will know what to do with them. And indeed, they drove them out of the country, mostly into Gaza and Jordan and Lebanon. And where else? Well, Saudi Arabia has its share of Palestinians. There are as many Palestinians in the diaspora in the immediate area out in the Middle East, 7 million is the last count, as there were within the occupied territories. And of course, there were another 500,000 in Michigan and those states as well. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And Israel's not going to make it out of this one. It's not going to make it unless it has a complete, what's the word? Metanoia, a Greek word, okay? Meta, completely around, noia, nous, your mind. So you take your mind, you'll flip it completely around, okay, 180 degrees, and you change your outlook and say, well, we're not really superior to other races. The Bible really doesn't say we should have the promised land, because the second part of that verse, Deuteronomy 15:4, says, so that there shall be no poor among you. Yeah, you shall have this land of milk and honey. It will be yours, so that there shall be no poor among you. Okay, that's the deal. I mean, you could call that a covenant. Okay, that's the deal. Even in Hebrew scriptures, and maybe I'll say just one more time, that the word in pre-Aramaic, the Hebrew scriptures, for justice denoted showing mercy to the poor. In other words, what was justice? The word for justice was showing mercy to the poor. And that's the best tradition of the Abrahamic religions. It comes down to what Jesus of Nazareth said, of course, and the prophet. One last thought here. Why is Hamas so popular? Why did they beat the PLO handily in the 2005 election? Why were they given Gaza? You know why? Because primarily because they heeded the charge, so that there shall be no poor among you. Christian scriptures would put it, take care of the widow, the orphan, the refugee. Why did Hamas have so many hospitals? Why was Hamas having so much support from the people who lived in Gaza? Well, the answer is not because everybody wants to kill an Israeli. or to mount the kind of attack that happened on October 7th. But I have to say that it was not unprovoked, that there are reasons in history to suggest why, when you run out of other options and the whole world thinks that your problem is put aside, like Trump and his son-in-law decided to do, just forget about the Palestinians. That's what happens when you repress a people that has every right to seek redress for their grievances, going back to 1948, when they were evicted, all 750,000 of them, those that were not killed by Israeli forces, evicted from Israel proper.
They were talking about raping of these young women of Israel. How did you find it? I want to know your take on this issue.
Nima, the charge of rape is the most effective arrow in the quiver of intelligence operatives and in media. Okay, for understandable reasons, rape is just beyond the pale. I mean, you can kill people, you can torture them even, but if you rape them, okay. So, what do we have here? We have a constant stream of charges of rape against people who the media wants to charge with rape. Take, for example, Libya. Hillary Clinton's advisor says, hey, let's say that the bad guys, the Gaddafi guys at Libya, are being given Viagra so they can rape more Libyan women. Let's say that. And so Hillary said, sounds good to me. So that was the legend bruited about in those days. And we know what happened to Gaddafi. We know the bedlam that has happened after Gaddafi. Okay. Now, when I first heard, oh, these Hamas people are taking time out from this very quick attack to say, okay, let's take turns raping the women. And I heard the defense minister, I think it was, saying, we know the orders went out from the Hamas leaders, which commanders should rape which women. And I said to myself, oh my God. And when we saw that in the Washington Post and the New York Times, I said, oh, damn, they're at it again. They're using the most effective quiver in the whole arsenal of this kind of defamation. I would mention also that's how they got Julian Assange. He didn't rape anyone. The women that were involved were beside themselves, saying, he didn't rape us. All we wanted was to get a test so we could be sure that he didn't have AIDS. Okay, that was it. That was the finding of the UN rapporteur for torture. Okay, there was no rape there either. But getting back to Hamas, so there is a wonderful group of young investigative reporters. It's called the Gray Zone. Max Blumenthal heads it, and they have all kinds of contacts within Israel and some within Gaza itself. Max has written books about all this, okay? And they pursued this. They dug into it. There's nothing to it, not one wisp of evidence. Matter of fact, some of the women have come out and say, no, that was made up. And even the New York Times had to delete what the defense minister said about every commander was given instructions as to which women to. Yeah, come on, right? So they're going to take time out from. So it was foolish on its face. The problem is, as everyone knows, the bad news goes out, and people believe it, and then by the time the rest of the people get their pants on and say, well, no, this wasn't true. How many people in the United States believe that Hamas raped women? I would say more than 50%, because the New York Times doesn't put that in the headlines. It doesn't put the retraction. Actually, it didn't even retract. It just deleted what this guy said, if memory serves. So So, in answer to your question, long story short, there was no rape that can be established or confirmed. It was all propaganda. The sorrowful thing is that it worked. Rape charges always work. That's why they're used.